Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, welcome back to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me on the podcast. It came to my attention. I had watched, as I usually do, I had watched CBS's Sunday Morning this past Sunday, and they had done an interview with David Eisenhower, the grandson of the former Supreme Allied Commander and former President Dwight David Eisenhower, because he has written a book about his grandfather and D-Day. And apparently he also maintains a lot of the Eisenhower. I don't know whether he actually works at the museum in Abilene. I'm not quite sure what he does, but I know that somehow he's involved with his grandfather's legacy. But also Susan Eisenhower, his brother, President Eisenhower's granddaughter. Well, she was apparently in Normandy and received some media attention. And I think she received some media attention, obviously, because she's the granddaughter of Dwight Eisenhower, and it was the 75th anniversary. Now, before I say anything, I just want to say this about Susan Eisenhower. She claims to be a Republican, but she endorsed Obama. She spoke on behalf of Obama at the 2008 Democrat National Convention. But that doesn't invalidate what she said. It just means that they're subject to some varying degrees of circumspection. I don't belittle, bemoan, or any way denigrate her choice of, if she wants to get behind Barack Obama, that's fine with me. I would imagine that her grandfather was spinning in his grave, but you cannot, your grandchildren and your children are going to do, all you can do is raise them the best that you can, and then they're going to go on and they're going to choose their own path in the world. Well, setting all of that aside, she was interviewed by, and I don't remember whether this, it's immaterial, but it was Fox News. I don't remember whether it was Martha McCallum or someone else. But as they are interviewing Susan Eisenhower in the cemetery at Normandy, they pan across and they show, in fact, I'm looking right now at a World War II vet. He looks to be an American World War II vet. And he's leaning over, he's saluting, and he just has this look in his eyes. You can't even imagine what might be going through his mind as he sits there. You know how your brain tries to do all these things at one time? I know mine does, and it gets me in trouble when I'm talking sometimes. He's sitting there, and I don't know who he's watching or listening to, but as he listens and watches whomever it is, you know that he's also thinking, as he looks upon the expanse of the cemetery at Normandy, whether he actually landed there or not, he has to have going through his mind everything that he has seen since those 75 years. Now, some of you might be in your 90s, but I doubt that's a small percentage of the audience of this podcast. But whatever age you are, think back 50 years and just think of all of the changes that you have seen over a 50-year period. Well, in the course of this interview with Susan Eisenhower, the Fox News correspondent says something to the effect: as you look across at the faces and the hunched over bodies of these World War II vets, as they're here to commemorate what they did on June 6, 1944, and all the subsequent days after, what do you think the state of America is today? What do you think about the current generation?
What shape do you think our country's in right now?
I think with respect to the courage that was displayed here at Normandy, we're not, we don't have the word selflessness and self-sacrifice in our vocabulary. So if I were teaching middle school class on this subject. I would say there was a time when people were called upon to do things they didn't necessarily want to do or couldn't be spared to do. And they reported for duty, they put their best selves in it, and they discovered that when they hit the beaches, that they were more than they ever thought they could be.
Now, I want to unpack what she said, but I have to confess I'm choked up. When she talked about how, these young men, these 18, 20-year-olds, as they were plucked out of whatever they were doing, they were teachers or they were factory workers or whatever they might have been, they didn't think they could spare to go to war. And they weren't sure of what they were even capable of until they hit the beaches. And then suddenly they knew they were capable of so much more than they had ever thought themselves capable of. I don't know why, I've got to tell you, but I'm fighting back tears, because as I look at that old veteran that I have frozen on my screen, I don't know what he did. He may have worked in a factory. He may have been a school teacher. He may have been any number of things. And I'm sure, can you imagine the adrenaline and the fear and everything that is going on? But once the doors of the boats opened and they spilled out into the waters and made their way to the beaches, or as the paratroopers came out of the sky onto the French soil, they suddenly realized how much more they were capable of because of the position that they were now in. When she says, I think with respect to the courage that was shown here at Normandy, today we don't have selflessness and self-sacrifice in our vocabulary. There was a time when people were called upon, she says, to do things they didn't necessarily want to do or couldn't be spared to do. They reported for duty, they put their best selves in it, and they discovered when they hit the beaches that they were more than they ever thought they could be. When you think about some of the, look, it's just a turn of phrase. When you think about the young whippersnappers today, do you think they could be more than they ever thought they could be? Indeed, some of their collegiate peers today would accuse those veterans, and that veteran I'm still looking at, they'd accuse them of toxic masculinity. They would accuse them of being, white supremacists. They would accuse them of being anything. Can you imagine the young kid in middle school, junior high, high school, or for that matter in the university, who dares to stand up and say to the bullies, stop, just stop it. Now, I think Susan Eisenhower's assessment is correct in the sense that selflessness and self-sacrifice are not really attributes widely shared among American young people. Let me rephrase that. I'm not really sure those are attributes widely shared among Americans. I know not you, and I doubt that in your sphere of influence. In fact, when I think of my sphere of influence and I think of my friends and my acquaintances, I think most of them would always stand up and do the right thing. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is Susan Eisenhower mentioned the word courage, but she did so only in reference to that generation of 75 years ago that we call America's greatest generation. But I would offer that it is courage first and foremost that is missing from the American virtues and American values of too many, and I keep wanting to say young people, but I don't. I want to say everybody. It is courage that empowers and underpins selflessness and self-sacrifice. Now, let's talk about young people for a minute. And if you're a millennial listening to this podcast, I'm not talking about you because you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. But I think most millennials think that they are courageous advocates and defenders when they adopt leftist political platforms. And I think that most millennials think that they're courageous when they advocate for the formation of a socialist state. You know, the disgraceful irony is that the genuinely courageous young people who began their rescue of the European continent at Normandy 75 years ago were charged with defeating Adolf Hitler's nationalist, socialist German Workers' Party and the reign of terror that it brought about, the Nazis. But the vast majority of Americans under the age of 35 have never served our country, militarily or otherwise. They've never even really served their community in any meaningful capacity. And what bugs me about that is that the gift of liberty is theirs only through inheritance. They didn't earn it, which is why I think so many Americans today don't understand the value of the gift of liberty that this nation has given us. Now, to be fair, some millennials have summoned the courage to step out of their generation's jackbooted political dogma, and they're forming the foundation of the next generation of liberty-loving Americans who understand the values that the Founding Fathers used to put together the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. I do believe there is that group. And so that goes back to my point that I've made countless times, that when you think back to the colonists in the 1700s, it wasn't 90% of them that stood up against King George. It was 10%. And so if I've got 10% of the generations behind me that understand the gift of liberty that is this nation, and they have the courage to stand up and defend it, then I can sleep. But what is courage? In the context of history and to this day, what does courage mean? So let's go through a little historical romp through philosophers, writers, pilots, judges have said about courage. Aristotle said that courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees the other qualities. Confucius, faced with what is right, to leave it undone shows a lack of courage. Horace, it is courage, courage, courage that raises the blood of life to crimson splendor. Live bravely and present a brave front to adversity. I need to take that one to heart. Shakespeare, cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of readiness to die. The paradox," he says, the paradox of courage is that a man must be a little careless of his life in order to keep it. Mark Twain, the great Mark Twain. Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. or the great C.S. Lewis. Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Supreme Court Judge Louis Brandeis. Those who won our independence believed liberty to be the secret of happiness and courage to be the secret of liberty. Winston Churchill. Courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because, as has been said, it is the quality which guarantees all others. Harry Truman. America was not built on fear. America was built on courage, on imagination, and an unbeatable determination to do the job at hand. John Wayne. Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. I'm scared to death, but I'm going to get on that horse anyway. The late Reverend Billy Graham. Courage is contagious. When a brave man takes a stand, the spines of others are stiffened. And Ronald Reagan. I can't do one without putting Reagan in here. There are no easy answers, but there are simple answers. But we must have the courage to do what we know is morally right. I'm still looking at the picture of the old man on Normandy, and I'm thinking about what Susan Eisenhower said. And I do want to believe, I so desperately want to believe that what she said is true. They reported for duty, they put their best selves in it, and they discovered when they hit the beaches that they were more than they ever thought they could be. We need courage in American society. We need courage in American culture. We need courage to understand that standing up against what the leftists are trying to do in terms of fundamentally transforming America, that standing up against that is the courageous thing to do. To be as crude as I can be, excuse me, and to put it in the most crass political terms, standing up and saying that Medicare for all is the right thing to do is not a courageous position to take. To stand up and say that somehow free college tuition for all is not a courageous thing to say or to do. It doesn't expand liberty. It doesn't expand the ability of the individual. Because remember, all of those things that I just described are all about the community, are all about the collective. And this country is a country that is based upon the individual. We believe that every individual going out with whatever talents and gifts that God has given him or her, and hopefully using those talents to the best of their ability, they will succeed or they will fail on their own. And I emphasize fail because there is no guarantee of success. I'm one. Look at me. I'm just clopping along, doing my radio program, and then one day I'm not. Terrified me. But I knew that it was me. It was me that had to pick up and move on. It was me. Because God's given me certain talents and certain abilities, and it is my responsibility to use those talents and abilities to the best of my ability. And I certainly, in no way, do not misread this. I am not in any way saying that I've hit the beach and that I'm going to be more than I ever thought I could be, because that is making a comparison between me and those young men on D-Day, and I refuse to make that comparison. But I do make this comparison. When faced with adversity, we have been blessed to live in a country where we can go out and we are not told that we fit in this box, or that we can only do this or do that. We can only work in the government factory. We can only go to the government school. No, we have individual liberty. And so it's cowardice. It is utter cowardice for those on the left to be talking about all of these collectivist ideas. That's not courageous. It's cowardice. That's the easy way out. And the sad thing about the easy way out is this: it leads to tyranny. It ultimately leads to tyranny. So Susan Eisenhower, I don't care who you supported, but when you made those comments about courage, man, oh man, did it set me off. In a good way. Not in a bad way, in a good way. And so I hope all of you will think about courage. And the next time you're watching television or listening to the radio or listening to a podcast, or you're talking with friends at dinner, or you're at church or synagogue or wherever you are, and someone says that, well, we ought to do this because, that's my least favorite. Besides, if it only saves one life. The other thing that sends my blood pressure soaring is there ought to be a law. When somebody says either one of those things to you the next time, I want you to think about what they're saying. Is it courageous or is it cowardice? Is it something that is going to grow individual liberty, or is it going to grow the collective? And I can tell you that is a black and white distinction for me. If it's growing the collective, I'm against it. If it is somehow expanding individual rights and individual liberty, I'm for it. And one last thing about courage, and I promise to move on. In 1756, John Adams said this: "It should be your care, therefore, and mine, to elevate the minds of our children and exalt their courage, to accelerate and animate their industry and activity, to excite them in a habitual contempt of meanness, abhorrence of injustice and inhumanity, and an ambition to excel in every capacity, faculty, and virtue. If we suffer their minds to grovel and creep in infancy, they will grovel all their lives." There's a lot that passes for meanness, abhorrence of injustice, and inhumanity. I do not deny that there is meanness, there is injustice, and there is inhumanity, not just in our country, but throughout the world. But the answer is not the collective. The answer is to stand up as an individual against the meanness, to stand up as an individual against injustice, and to stand up as an individual against inhumanity. Courage. Something we should be instilling in our children, and that we should teach them that it is courageous to stand up against meanness, injustice, and inhumanity. And you don't need a group to do it. You can do it on your own. I know this is probably a little heavy for the podcast. I'll try to get to some fun stuff in a minute. But I want to take that whole concept of courage and the concept of individual liberty. And I want to talk about what's going on with Democrats since they took the House of Representatives in the 2018 midterm elections. Because when I talk about young people, there is a new cohort of young uber progressive congressional Democrats that are wildly and enthusiastically proposing legislation to fundamentally change the very fabric of the United States. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Tlaib what's-her-name, they're all eager to tap into the energy generated by their comrades in the House of Representatives. The 2020 Democratic presidential candidates are also advancing positions that overemphasize the democratic part of the United States Republican form of government. Now, cynics, and I count myself as a part-time cynic, they might say that the left has always been working to undermine American institutions and that the left has always worked to undermine cultural norms. They've always been working to take down the guardrails. And while a hard left fringe has always existed, an August 2018 Gallup poll suggests that far left philosophies are enjoying a burgeoning support. That poll revealed that less than half of Democrats, 47%, view capitalism favorably. Now, let me just a parenthetical here. I understand why. Because we have so melded. We've taken the welder's torch and we have welded government and the marketplace together in forms of regulation, in forms of quid pro quos. We have bastardized free markets and capitalism. So I'm not shocked that less than half of Democrats view capitalism favorably. But here's how fast we're moving. In 2016, 56% of Democrats held a favorable view of capitalism. And it's just not Gallup. Pew did a study 2 years ago that found that 48% of Americans would prefer a bigger government that provides more services to the public. And that very same study found that support for increased government spending has risen since 2013, and that younger people are more likely to support government expansion. Now, we know this just by looking around. Free this, free that, free everything. Back in 1984, socialist sympathizers lived on the outer fringes of the Democratic Party. If they lived there. They were allowed to live there, but they weren't allowed to come in the door. Poor old Walter Mondale enjoyed the endorsement of the AFL-CIO. He enjoyed the endorsement of the National Organization of Women. But he lost the 1984 election in catastrophic style to the pro-capitalist and the virulently anti-communist President Ronald Reagan. But even more impressive, here's the history most people don't know. Here's how fast and how far we have fallen. Even more impressive were Reagan's victories in traditional blue states like New York, Massachusetts, and California. Now I want you to think about that. A Republican winning the electoral votes in New York, Massachusetts, and California. Now, if conservative Reagan could dominate the Electoral College and the national popular vote 35 years ago, then you have to admit there's something new and different that is motivating the left today. And that's the point I want to make. The difference, at least in terms of policy, seems to be a disregard for long-standing constitutional norms. Because most of the ideas energizing the left brush off long-standing government precedents, would require amendments to the United States Constitution, and instead of viewing the Declaration of Independence as an apple of gold and the Constitution as its frame of silver, as Lincoln did, all these new Democrats see the founding documents as this underwhelming promise impeded by a government designed to thwart man's better angels. I find that so bizarre because government thwarting our better angels? Yes, government thwarts our better angels. But the problem is the left today sees the government as being that which is somehow going to what? Release our better angels to go out and do great things. So let's walk through a few of them. Free speech. I know I can hear many of you clicking off right now. Stay tuned. Keep listening. This is important. Now, as enshrined in the First Amendment, the right to free speech is integral to the American identity. In no other country in the world, let me say that again. In no other country in the world do you and I, do citizens, enjoy such liberal protections for speech and expression as we do. Irreverent songs, provocative philosophical treatises, daring scientific advancements. The United States' influence in all fields stems from one fundamental right, the right of free speech. So, that's why I think that perhaps the most vulgar of the new left's policy agendas is the campaign to chill free speech in the United States. Now, I could go off on a tangent here about hate speech, bigoted speech, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I want to give you some concrete examples of why this is such a bugaboo with me. Because once in power, House Democrats took specific aim at political speech. The most fundamental of free speech in this country is political speech. The very first item that Speaker Pelosi introduced was the deceptively named For the People Act, House Resolution 1. Now, it's going to die. But it doesn't make any difference whether it's going to die or not, because progressives don't care. Progressives care about just push it a little bit, get it introduced, start getting people comfortable talking about it. And then when they get comfortable talking about it, you can expand it more. And then pretty soon you get the language changed. And now everybody's using the same vocabulary. Words have different meanings now. And boom, you're hit with it and didn't even know it. House Resolution 1 is a 571-page wish list of what I consider to be blatantly unconstitutional changes to campaign finance. It would force nonprofit entities engaged in political speech to disclose donor information. In 2010, the Supreme Court established that nonprofit entities and corporations have the right to collectively participate in political discourse in the Citizens United case, Citizens v. the Federal Election Commission. Now, of course, that decision is controversial because Citizens United affirmed the rights of labor unions to do the same thing. They actually affirmed what the labor unions have been doing for decades. But because we don't pay attention to history, we don't pay attention. You mean the unions have been doing the same thing that Citizens United says that others can do now? Yeah. But the progressives claim that decision allows that dark money to influence American politics. Now they're trying to upend the case. But instead of dismissing this foolish suggestion, H.R. 1 explicitly calls for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. You do that, you gut the First Amendment, and you nullify decades' worth of jurisprudence. The For the People Act, H.R. 1, also dangerously expands the definition of electioneering communications, so that more and more nonprofit organizations and their donors are going to be subject to disclosure. Now, I've always said, and I want to make sure that you understand the distinction here, I've always said that I think that anybody ought to be able to give however much money they want to a candidate. So that if you're running for dog catcher, and I think that you would make, to paraphrase Dr. King, you would make the best damn dog catcher in the eyes of God, and I've got $1 million to donate to your dog catcher campaign, I should be able to do that. The only thing I ask in return is that if I exercise my right of free speech by giving you $1 million for your dog catcher campaign, that you as the recipient of that $1 million must disclose that so that people can make their own decision about, well, you know, that Michael Brown supporting Billy Bob for dog catcher, and he wrote him a check for $1 million. I don't like that Michael Brown, and if he's supporting Billy Bob, I can't vote for Billy Bob. I'm going to vote for Sally Sue. I'm talking about individual donations to individual candidates. There's a difference, though, between that and a nonprofit organization that seeks to collect money to put up message ads, whatever else they want to do to campaign before, on behalf of or in opposition to a candidate or an issue. And they go out and they pool contributions, and they do it under the umbrella of a legitimately recognized 501 tax-exempt organization. Then those donors should be able to remain secret. But that's not what the left wants. Why do they not want, why do they want to change that? Because they want to destroy another part of the First Amendment, the freedom of association. That if I want to associate, and I'm not, so I'm going to use it as an example. I am not a member of the National Rifle Association. But if I were a member of the National Rifle Association, and they had a political, which they do, a political action committee, and I wanted to donate to that political action committee, and I was wealthy enough that I knew that the PAC of the NRA was having a little bit of difficulty, or they really needed to spend a bunch of money in California or Texas or Colorado or somewhere else to defeat something, and I had the wherewithal to write $1 million check to the PAC, and I didn't want my name disclosed, I should be able to do that. That's why the left doesn't want that to happen. Because they want those names disclosed. Because then they can dox you. They can disclose your private information. They can come to your home. They can park in your front yard, or they can park on they'll park in the front yard, even though that's illegal. They'll park on the sidewalk. They'll park in the street. And they'll harass you and your family. Michael, they'll never do that. If you think they'll never do that, you're not paying attention. They do that all the time. Have you never seen the Attorney General of the United States of America coming out of his own home in Virginia? Have you never seen anybody? Did you never see the videos of me, stupid little old me, coming out of my town home in Alexandria, Virginia, with a pool of reporters out there? Doxing. They wanted everybody to know where I lived. But there's another speech-chilling feature of H.R. 1. It's just a simple naked power grab. They want to add another commissioner to the Federal Election Commission. Now, the FEC, that's the body that they've got 6 commissioners. They have all these strict rules about partisan affiliation because they want their decisions to be as nonpartisan as possible. Well, it's designed to encourage nonpartisan consensus on a government organization that has the power to silence political discourse. Now, I'm one of these guys that would like to get rid of the Federal Election Commission, just like I'd like to get rid of the Internal Revenue Service. You know, if all we had to do was just have a flat tax of, X percent, write a check, well, you could get rid of 90% of the Internal Revenue Service. Well, the same is true of the Federal Election Commission. If all we did was just have candidates had to report all of their contributions and their expenditures, you could get rid of most of everything else that the FEC does. But adding another seat to the Federal Election Commission would intentionally unbalance that body and would lead to more partisan decisions. That's House Resolution 1. That's my point about it doesn't take courage to do this stuff. What they're trying to do is they're trying to fundamentally alter this country. And they know that this legislation won't pass. That doesn't make any difference to them. It is about getting people comfortable talking about X in whatever new language X is. That's the very nature of progressivism. And that's what we're battling against. And that's why I'm on this tirade today about courage. Just the courage to stand up for your principles. Now, let's move on to some fun stuff, although this isn't exactly fun. Kamala Harris was doing an interview in which she started talking about what she was going to do if elected president. Now, everybody they've got their panties in a wad because ostensibly Donald Trump was trying to tell the Department of Justice who to prosecute, who not to prosecute, who to go after, who not to go after, which I always found funny. I found it funny because Trump, in his way of talking and doing things, it's never really quite clear. He has this habit of not necessarily finishing his sentences, which in his case as president actually works out good for him, other than it gives the media something to mock or to misinterpret or to interpret in their own way. But for the president of the United States to go to the attorney general and say, I want you to prosecute Michael Brown. Don't you find that just a little dictatorial? Don't you find that just a little kind of a politicization of the Department of Justice? Well, listen to what Kamala Harris had to say about what she would do once elected.
Editorial decision whether or not you're in the room. You would be appointing the people who would be in the room. You ended that recent speech talking about the 10 counts of obstruction of justice, as you framed it.
Indeed.
In the Mueller report.
No, I didn't frame it. The Mueller report. Right?
But of course, as Robert Mueller said, there's that current.
I'm sorry, I have to pause for just a moment. I've just discovered why we cannot elect Kamala Harris president of the United States. She has a Hillary Clinton cackle. I can't do it.
In the Mueller report.
No, I didn't frame it. The Mueller report, right?
But of course, as Robert Mueller said, there's that current DOJ policy that you can't charge a sitting president. You have been very clear that you want impeachment proceedings to begin. If you become president, if he was never impeached, would you want the Department of Justice, now that he is no longer a sitting president, to go forward with those obstruction of justice charges?
I believe that they would have no choice and that they should, yes. There has to be accountability. I mean, look, people might, question why I became a prosecutor. Well, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I believe there should be accountability. Everyone should.
There should be accountability, meaning that prosecutors get to exercise their prosecutorial discretion. The Department of Justice of the United States of America doesn't represent. How many times have we heard this? Bill Barr, you don't represent Donald Trump. You are not the president's personal attorney. You're supposed to be representing the people of the United States. Now here's Kamala Harris running for president and saying, in essence, if I get elected, I'm going to tell my Department of Justice, you must go prosecute Donald Trump. Isn't that the same thing that they're accusing Donald Trump of doing, which he is not doing?
Accountable, and the president is not above the law.
Even if it meant a former president going on trial, serving jail time?
Well, the facts and the evidence will take the process where it leads. But I have read the Mueller report. I do believe that we should believe Bob Mueller when he tells us, essentially, that the only reason an indictment was not returned is because of a memo?
No, that's apparently not the truth. Bill Barr, who has contemporaneous notes of his conversations with Bob Mueller, says that Bob Mueller told him that the Department of Justice policy against prosecuting or indicting a sitting president was not part of his consideration. This is the kind of continuously publishing a lie so that the narrative gets embedded in people's brains drives me up the wall. She's lying. But do you think that, I don't even know who this Yahoo reporter is. Do you think he has the historical knowledge? Do you think he even has the contemporaneous knowledge about what took place to ask her? Well, wait a minute, that's not what Bob Mueller said.
In the Department of Justice that suggests you cannot indict a sitting president. But I've seen prosecution of cases on much less evidence.
Prosecutions of presidents on much less evidence? Name those, sweetheart. Name those. I can't, look, name me a president that was, after office, indicted on lesser charges. Back it up. That's what she said. I'm not making it up.
In the Department of Justice that suggests you cannot indict a sitting president. But I've seen prosecution of cases on much less evidence. And I think that if we're gonna talk about the integrity of our criminal justice system, you know, one of the most beautiful, magnificent, I think, works of architecture in our nation is in our nation's capital, and it is named the United States Supreme Court. Beautiful building.
I'm sorry. What does the architecture of the Supreme Court building have to do with whether or not we're going to indict a sitting president? Or that we're going to prosecute a president after he leaves office?
On one side, etched in the marble, are the words equal justice under law. It doesn't say except for the president. There you go.
Okay.
It doesn't need to say except for the president. The Department of Justice policy is simply this. The Founding Fathers gave a remedy that if a president commits a crime, let's say, let me think of a president that may have committed a crime. Oh, hang on a minute. Dang, I don't even have any Diet Coke to sip. I mean, there's tequila right over there. I could go sip some tequila. Let's see. I know. There was this president that committed perjury. He lied under oath in a deposition. His name was Jefferson. I don't know, not Thomas Jefferson. Oh, yeah, William Jefferson Blythe Clinton. He committed a crime, perjury. Now, that's perjury and lying, two entirely different things. You know, right now I could tell you that I'm sitting here only in my underwear. Well, that would be a lie. Or maybe not. Perjury, on the other hand, is lying under oath. If we're going to prosecute people for lying, then we might as well get 535 prosecutions ready. Well, I guess 536, because you got 535 members of the House and Senate and one president, and they all lie. But they don't all commit perjury, lying under oath. The Department of Justice policy is against indicting a sitting president because we have a political remedy for a president that commits a crime. It's called impeachment. And if they think that the President of the United States has committed a crime, or if they think that the President of the United States has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, a political art term, then they can go file articles of impeachment, see if they can get those through the House. If they can get those through the House of Representatives, then they can march those articles of impeachment over to the United States Senate. They can call the Chief Justice down. They can have a trial. And just as in the case of someone who committed perjury, lost his law license over it, and paid a hefty fine, they can vote to convict or not convict. And in the case of that president who committed perjury, they voted not to convict. And the Republicans paid dearly for it. The Department of Justice memo is, in essence, if a president commits a crime, you cannot prosecute him while he is in office. And the logic for that is very simple. You don't want prosecutors all over the country or prosecutors in the system of the federal judiciary going after presidents for, I don't know, drunk driving. Although I would kind of like to see that. Like in Secret Service, code whatever. The president has just stolen the beast. Yes, he just ran out of the White House mess, drunker than a skunk. He stole the beast, and he's now driving down Constitution Avenue. Oh, I'd like to see that. Pennsylvania Avenue. I don't care which way, either one. I'd like to see that. No, the founder said, if you think the president is unfit for office or has committed a high crime and misdemeanor, there is a political solution to that. It's a difficult political solution because we don't want to every 2 years, every 4 years, be going after a president for impeachment. So the Department of Justice memo is, cannot indict a sitting president. That's our policy. Once he leaves office, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon could have been charged with the crime of obstruction of justice. He wasn't, because Gerald Ford pardoned him. When Kamala Harris talks about, I'm going to have the Department of Justice go after Donald Trump, she's in essence saying, I'm going to use the Department of Justice for political purposes. You don't telegraph what you're going to do or not going to do. And you certainly don't do that as a candidate. Particularly when you've been out there bitching about how the argument goes that Donald Trump has been politicizing the Department of Justice. No, he hasn't. They're just upset because the Attorney General that he appointed, Bill Barr, doesn't give a rat's ass what members of Congress think of him. He is in search of the truth, wherever that leads him. If that leads him back to the Obama White House, to the Obama National Security Council, if it leads him back to Clapper or Brennan, so be it. He's going to find out how all of this started. That's what they really fear. And now we have to take a time out for baseball. Oh, it's just like radio. Got to take time out for baseball. Here's Santangelo announcing the Nationals.
400.
Yep, I just saw that. They've been showing it for a month, and I just saw it. It's down the bottom. You got to get close.
Giving the fans what they want, MLB.
These guys are putting good swings on it, too. It's just a lot of carry. It's the bats, too. We were talking about this the other day. You remember, what was it, 12, maybe 13, when the bats were helicoptering everywhere?
Maples shattering.
Only a matter of time before somebody gets stabbed with a bat. Now, when do you see that? You rarely see a bat break violently anymore. I just think they've mastered the craft, whether it's maple or ash or whatever they're using now. We'll show the Exmo. You'll see toothpicks flying around. Every once in a while, one will be on the ground past the pitcher, but not the violent helicopter spear thing that we saw for a couple of years anymore. And I think the bats plus the balls, plus launch angles, plus pitchers throwing hard, plus global warming is why there's so many home runs.
Oh, seriously? I think the bats plus the balls plus launch angles plus pitchers throwing hard plus global warming is why there's so many home runs. Let me offend some of you baseball fans out there. It's not global warming. And you know what the best baseball game is? 1-0, 2-0. A low-scoring game where you have to play strategy, where you have to really think about what you're doing. Everybody's enamored with home runs. I enjoy a good home run, but a game that's 18-13, nah, not so much. But global warming, shut up. And for all of you that support Donald Trump, a congressman by the name of Marcia Fudge, a Democrat of Ohio, went to the House floor to read a letter and then decided in her general speeches, the 5-minute speeches they're allowed to give so they can get on C-SPAN so their staff can then clip their speeches and send it back to the local TV station so they can say, look what your local congressman is doing. Marcia Fudge said, Fudge, isn't that great? Marcia Fudge said this about you.
It is glaringly apparent that many who support the present administration are either racist, steeped in religious beliefs, ignorant, or as my mother used to say, just plain dumb. I believe the crooked ascension of Trump to the Oval Office is a gauge that measures the declining patriotic and moral values of the many citizens of America, as well as being the revelation of the hidden bigotry, judgmental attitudes that yet exist in many of those who call themselves evangelicals. I believe I can safely assume that the United States is no longer a democracy. A democratic government is one that is governed by the people or their elected representatives.
Hey, sweetheart, guess what? We never were a democracy. Wow. It's only 42 seconds. You want to hear it again, I know.
It is glaringly apparent that many who support the present administration are either racist, steeped in religious beliefs, ignorant.
Racist religious beliefs, ignorant.
Or as my mother used to say, just plain dumb.
Speaking of just plain dumb, I think she's I think she is the new just plain dumb member of Congress. Oh.
I believe the crooked ascension of Trump to the Oval Office is a gauge that measures the declining patriotic and moral values of the many citizens of America, as well as being the revelation of the hidden bigotry, judgmental attitudes that yet exist in many of those who call themselves evangelicals.
All you evangelical Christians out there, shame on you. You're just a bunch of bigots. Yes. Oh.
I believe I can safely assume that the United States is no longer a democracy.
Yep, you can safely assume that. We have a member of the United States Congress telling you that you can safely assume that the United States of America is no longer a democracy. Never knew we were. And if that wasn't good enough for you, another Democrat congresswoman said this about her male colleagues.
Mr. Speaker, it is tiring to hear from so many sex-starved males on this floor talk about a woman's right to choose. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Of course there's going to be a point of order. She just called out her colleagues as sex-starved males. Her name is Torres. She's a Democrat from California.
I'd just like to ask my friend if she'd like to change her last statement.
If it pleases my colleague on the other side, I will withdraw my statement about sex-starved males on the floor.
And they want to raise. They want to raise. She's calling them sex-starved males. I think they do need a, I'm changing my mind. They don't need $174,000 a year. They need $574,000 a year.
Conversations that rightfully I deserve to have with my own doctor, choosing when women want to have a family and to avoid pregnancies before they become pregnancies.
Sex-starved males are trying to stop sex-starved males are trying to stop the killing of babies. Oh, I could just do this all day long. Hang on, because I like to try to tie things together. So here you have this Congresswoman Torres from California calling the Republican members of Congress sex-starved males. But according to the 2018 SKYN Condoms Millennial Sex Survey, which looked at almost 4,000 people ages 19 to 36, Republicans are having more sex than Democrats. 77% of Republicans are doing it at least once a week, while only 68% of Democrats can say the same. Now, there's a joke in there somewhere, but about donkeys and elephants. But let's stick to the facts, shall we? But here's the rest of the study too. Democrats have the safest sex. Republicans have the most sexual confidence. Well, of course, Republicans are the most satisfied with their sex lives. Republicans sext, sext. Republicans sext the most. Have you ever sent a sext message? I've never sent like a wiener pic. No, have not. Even to Tamara. No, just Republicans sext the most? Oh. Sex-starved white males. She doesn't read the studies. And if you want to know why I'm a libertarian and a small government conservative, the CDC is out with a story. You can find it at go.usa.gov. Tempted to have a bite of batter while baking? Now, who doesn't? This is communist. Communism is everywhere. Who doesn't want, when Tamara or my mom, when they make chocolate chip cookies. How many of you have ever gone over and stuck your finger in that bowl and pulled up some cookie dough, made sure you had some chocolate chips on it, and stuck that finger in your mouth? Of course you have. Every red-blooded American male or female has done the same thing. And here's a bunch of communists at the CDC telling us you can't do that because even if it doesn't contain raw eggs, it can still make you sick. Do you know I've been doing that? I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I've been doing that for as long as I've been alive. And not once have I gotten sick from eating cookie dough from my wife or my mother or my daughter, or quite frankly, even from that tube of cookie dough that you can get at the grocery store. Oh, man. If I could just find that sugar-free, I'd be in heaven. I wouldn't need to do a podcast. I wouldn't need to do radio. I wouldn't need to do anything. I could just sit around the house in my underwear with tubes of sugar-free cookie dough. Turn on Fox News, or just turn on, put on a headset and turn on music. Scratch myself, dig out some cookie dough, and just eat cookie dough all day long. And then if I could just get Diet Coke, like if I could get Sonic to deliver Diet Coke, I could have a vanilla Diet Coke or a cherry Diet Coke, cookie dough, sit in my big chair in my underwear, and there's the rest of my life right there. Done. What happened to that Michael Brown? He started eating cookie dough, and we never saw from him again. Well, what happened to his family? They just left. They couldn't put up with it, so they just left. Well, where is he? Last we saw him, he's down in the basement where his studio was, where he used to do that podcast and his radio program. And he's down there eating cookie dough. And because King Soopers does the delivery, he puts on a robe. He hears the doorbell. He goes up. He gets his cookie dough. And he goes right back down to his big chair. And he keeps sticking his finger in the cookie dough. Yep. One day when, there'll be an obituary. Michael Brown, former Undersecretary of Homeland Security and Director of FEMA, passes away alone in his home eating raw cookie dough. Now, I'm going to put this out here without any comment, and I'd be curious. You can tweet me at Michael Brown USA. You can send me an email through the website, michaelbrowntoday.com. You can put a comment on YouTube if you listen to the podcast on YouTube. You can put a comment on Spreaker, wherever. So here's the story, and I'm just going to leave it at this. Pontiac, Michigan. A Pontiac man will spend up to 50 years in prison after he was convicted of assaulting a pregnant individual, intentionally causing a miscarriage or stillbirth, according to the Associated Press. Khalil Ellison, age 23, was sentenced by Judge Ray Lee Chabot to serve 11 and a quarter years in prison for the conviction after he pleaded no contest to killing his girlfriend's unborn baby during an argument. The woman previously testified, saying Ellison pulled her off their bed by her feet while they were arguing and began stomping on her stomach, resulting in the death of the baby. The AP reports Ellison told the court it's, quote, something I can't take back, and now he's, quote, lost everything. No comment. End of story. And let's get a couple of taxpayer relief shots in. The first one comes to us, actually it comes to us from KSL in Salt Lake City, but it's about a Utah veterinarian. I was going to make a crude joke here about a veterinarian walks into a bar, but
Mexico are still trying to figure out the circumstances surrounding the shooting death of a Utah man by a federal law enforcement officer.
Yeah, news specialist Alex Cabrera is following that story for us tonight. He's live in South Jordan where the man worked. And Alex, it appears he has been identified at this hour.
He has been, Mike and Ashley. He is 43-year-old Cody Rathel, who lived in Saratoga Springs, has family in Tooele County, and worked as a veterinarian here in South Jordan. According to Albuquerque police, Rathel was involved in some type of domestic situation with either his ex-girlfriend or his ex-wife at a bar Saturday evening. Police say he showed a gun. That's when an off-duty federal law enforcement officer shot him. Detectives are also saying this appears to be some type of stalking case, though they are still investigating that as well as the circumstances surrounding the shooting itself. We spoke with a man named Bob Gowans, who was Rathel's teacher in school and with the FFA program, the Future Farmers of America, who says no matter what happened and the reason why, he remembers Rathel as a great guy, and that's the person he will never forget.
I don't know all the ins and outs. I know that a father, their kids are without a father. Cody had a lot of family. Tragic loss for his family.
Rathel leaves behind 3 children. His sister posted on Facebook how he had his demons, but now he has his wings. Coming up in our 6:30 newscast.
I don't really know. It's sad that he has a family and he's dead. But you don't walk into a bar chasing a woman with a gun, because there just might be an FBI agent in the bar. By the way, I need to go study my New Mexico law. Isn't it illegal to take a gun, concealed or not, whether you have a concealed carry permit or not? Isn't it illegal to take a gun into a saloon? I'll try to find out. Authorities say that a man held at knife point in an Oklahoma store in Poto, Oklahoma. None of you yahoos know where Poto, Oklahoma is. I've been to Poto.
FBI investigators identifying the man shot and killed by police in Poto today. OSBI says Jaquan Thompson held a knife to a store clerk's throat and refused to drop it. That's when authorities say they shot and killed him. Right now, OSBI asking for information about Thompson's relatives.
And I guess the lesson for this thug is, or for all thugs, if you're going to go into a convenience store and you're going to put a knife to the throat of the clerk and the popo shows up, you might end up just DRT, dead right there. Thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. As usual, you can subscribe to us on iTunes. And if you go to iTunes, if you could leave a 5-star ranking, that would be great. And if you have time to write a review, well, we'll send you a check in the mail, or I'll send you some of that cookie dough that I'm going to be sitting around eating. If you want to follow us on social media, on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all you have to do is go to michaelbrowntoday.com, michaelbrowntoday.com. Follow me on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube page. We'd like to get that up over 2,000. See, we always have these metrics we're trying to meet. So if you can get over to YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channel, that would be fantastic. And if you'd follow me on Twitter at Michael Brown USA, follow me on Facebook, Michael D. Brown, follow me on Instagram, Michael D. Brown. You can do all of that by simply going to michaelbrowntoday.com. Talk to you tomorrow.